Hello Year 6, this is lesson 2 of our 2-week writing unit where we are going to be writing a letter in role. Now if you remember yesterday I said I would tell you later on in the week who you will be writing as and what you need to do in terms of the letter writing. But today we are going to be using a range of descriptive and verb sentence starters to write a short character description about the man at the very beginning, when we see him right at the very beginning of the clip. So, Year 6, what I would like you to do now is to, if you haven't already done it, is to pull up the link for the piano. And I want you to watch the first 30 seconds of the clip. Now you may have to re-watch this several times because there's a lot of things that you can get out of this first clip, and when you're watching it I want you to start to write down words and phrases that you might use to describe the elderly man's appearance. Now I watched it quite a few times to get my list, but think about how he's sat, is he by himself? Look at his head, look at his hands, look at the way he's holding his body, look at the way he interacts with the keyboard on the piano, all sorts of things like that. And then you're going to come up with a list. So that's what I would like you to do now, Year 6. Okay, hopefully you have now got a long list of descriptive words and phrases to describe the man in that first 30 seconds of his video. So these are a few that I came up with. I came up that he was lonely, and that, or he looked lonely to me because he was by himself, and his whole demeanour, the way he held himself, struck me as someone who was quite lonely. He was wrinkled, he was old, his hands were paper thin, you could see the veins right the way through them, and the veins were quite prominent as well, they stood out quite a bit as well, which tends to happen as you get older. So he had a creased brow, his brow was furrowed with creases when he was concentrating playing the piano, and he was playing the ivory keys of the piano. He was playing them quite gently as though he was caressing them. His eyes were full of sorrow, so I put he had sorrowful eyes. He was stooped and bent. That could have been old age, but he was also bent over the piano keys, and his shoulders were quite thin and gaunt. Gaunt is a much better word than thin, actually, and I might use that in my writing. He was bald, and I put he was alone. Now remember, we've had this discussion, particularly in Shackleton class, I know we've had this discussion about can you be alone and lonely, or can you be just lonely or alone? So it's up to you, it's the choices that you make, but you should have a really good bank of descriptive words. If you haven't, I suggest you go back and watch the clip again and pick up on some of the ideas that I've just talked about and extend your list that you've got, because it's this list that's going to be so important to help you do your descriptive piece of writing about the old man. So now what I want you to do, because remember we said you're writing descriptive sentence starters, but you're also doing verb sentence starters. I want you to come up with a list of verbs that describe how the man is moving and what he is doing. I'll start you off. I've got myself a list here. Let's just get rid of this. I was saying that he was hunching, or he was hunched over the keys. He was sitting, or he's going to have sitting, that wouldn't be right, or he was sat. He was hitting the keys. His hands were floating above the keys. He leaned in towards the piano, and he was playing, or he played the piano. So there's your starter. I've given you 6 words. You should have at least 10 for your sentence starters. So once you've done that, Year 6, you're ready to move on to the next activity. Let me talk you through that. Okay, so your task for today, I've split you into your groups. The yellow group, you're going to be building sentences, writing sentences about the man's appearance. Can you vary your sentence starters? Green group, you are going to write a short character description of the man using sentences with descriptive and verb openers. Now, a short character description. I'm not looking for a page, I'm looking for a paragraph. Blue group, I want you to write a character description of the man using a range of sentence openers. Certainly there will be descriptive and verb openers within there, but what other ones can you get in? And look at your vocabulary as well and make the link between the man and the vocabulary. And remember our slow write from last week. That's for all of you actually, that's a really good prompt to help you vary your sentence openers. Now, I'm going to do the first part of mine here to show you how I'm going to approach it. I've already got my bank that I've created of description and of verbs. So what I'm going to do now is I've done myself a little sort of almost like a mini plan of what I want to include, and it is under here. So let me move it out of the way because you might want to use this as well. So I'm going to introduce and set the scene in a sentence. Then I'm going to talk about how he sat and how he started to play the music. Then I'm going to move on to describe his hands moving over the keys, what his hands looked like. Then I'm going to make the link between playing music and having his memories. Then I'm going to describe his face, describe his clothes, and finally I'm going to describe his expression. And that's how I'm going to work my way down to make sure that I get every single thing in about that man. So let's get started. Okay, bring this down to 18 I think, and let's type it in black so you can see it very clearly. Okay, so I'm looking at description and verb openers, and I'm going to introduce the scene. So I'm going to think about, well, where was he? Well, he was sat, and he was sat quite quietly. I'm going to put silently, I think. So sitting, so I've got my verb opener straight away. Sitting silently. Then I'm going to say, where was he sitting? So sitting silently at the piano. Then I'm going to introduce the old man. So the old man, and when he sat down, he was almost as though he was composing himself and staring off, possibly already thinking about his memories. So let me see, the old man stared blankly at the keys. Perhaps already his mind was drifting back to the past. Silently sitting at the piano, the old man stared blankly at the keys. Perhaps already his mind was drifting back to the past. Right. So I've done that already, just in one sentence. So now I need to do, I've done my verb opener, I'm going to do a description now to start it off. So I'm going to describe how he sat. Or he was sat alone. So another word for alone is solitary. So a solitary figure with his gaunt shoulders. I'm using this thin shoulders. His gaunt shoulders hunched forward. So I'm using one of my verbs, hunched forward. And what was he doing? He was a solitary figure with his gaunt shoulders hunched forward. He was getting ready to play. So, preparing to play. Okay, a solitary figure with his gaunt shoulders hunched forward, preparing to play. Now, what else would he do? Now, I've seen piano players, when they get ready, sometimes they do some finger exercises. They flex their fingers, so I'm going to say he was flexing his fingers. Flexing his fingers. He then placed them on the ivory keys. Okay, he placed them on the ivory keys. And I don't want to say start playing the piano because I've already mentioned playing the piano. Flexing his fingers, placed them on the ivory keys. And I can't say began to play because I've already put that. So I'm going to start talking about his memory. So his So I now want to talk about a little bit more about him staring into the distance, because then that pulls it back to this bit here, his mind drifting back. I want to keep talking about his memories, and I've mentioned start to create his memories here. As he played, he stared blankly. Blankly into the distance. His mind focused on other things. Okay, now I've noticed here when I'm reading back in my head that I've got stared blankly here and stared blankly here. So I've got to change that. This is where my editing comes in. As he played, he focused onto, I'm going to take all this out, he focused onto a distant memory. And I'm going to take all that out. As he played, he focused on a distant memory. All the time from the past. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to talk about writing about his, I'm going to move on to talk about his hands. And I'm going to look at everything on here. I might even highlight things that I want to use next. So he had prominent veins on his hands, and they played the IVPs, and they were paper thin. Okay, and I could say that they were floating or that they played. So I know that I'm going to use all that in my next sentence. Now I'm going to do that while you're doing yours, year 6. So I'll have my paragraph and you'll have your paragraph. Now what I've also done, you've got this and you can magpie some of my ideas if you choose to, but I've also done you a waggle that shows this whole structure here. So please, that was emailed out to you all, so please take the time to read that one, because you might get some ideas if you're stuck from the waggle to help you. So when you have done your character description year 6, what I would like you to do now is to go back and check, have you done what I've asked you to do? Have you done everything here that I asked you? Green group, have you done a short character description using descriptive and verb openers? Blue group, have you done a range of sentence openers and looked at the precise vocabulary? And yellow group, have you built me a range of sentences to describe the man's appearance? So if you think you've done that, I then want you to go back and check your spelling. Does it make sense? And have you got the correct punctuation in so that it's read correctly by the reader? When you have done that and you're happy with your work year 6, this lesson is now over. Please remember though to send your work through to your class teacher at the end of the day.